Tonight, George Gershwin's Concerto in F, America's jazz era brought to the symphonic stage. The Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, led by Andreas Delfs, with pianist Pascal Rogé, play Gershwin, here on public television. George Gershwin had a musical Midas touch. He found success as a songwriter, a composer of Broadway shows, and as a film composer. His Rhapsody in Blue and An American in Paris grabbed the public's attention. They were among the first compositions for symphony orchestra written by American homegrown talent that reached a large audience. The popularity of his music won him the honor of being the first American featured on the cover of Time magazine in July 1925. In his orchestral music, Gershwin meshed the uniquely American sounds of jazz with the very European sounds of classical music. This blending found its ultimate expression in the Concerto in F.
I have a soft spot for that concerto. It's a jazz piece, and at the same time it has a classical form. And for a pianist like me, it's very attractive to have that kind of duality and use the jazz and the classical together, and show also that to audiences that Gershwin is not only a jazz composer, but he was able to orchestrate and to construct a classical concerto with the spontaneity of jazz.
Gershwin's Concerto in F has been called Jazz in 3 Movements. He wrote about the piece in the program notes for its 1925 premiere. The first movement, wrote Gershwin, employs the Charleston rhythm. It is quick and pulsating, representing the young, enthusiastic spirit of American life. He wrote, "The second movement has a poetic nocturnal atmosphere, which has come to be referred to as the American blues, but in a purer form than that which they are usually treated." Gershwin wrote, "The final movement reverts to the style of the first. It is an orgy of rhythms, starting violently and keeping the same pace throughout."
We hail Gershwin as the king of the 32-bar song, of the one that is maybe in a couple of generations will be called the Schubert of his generation. If we look for that in the piano concerto, we find it. The great tunes, especially in the first and the second movement, have that structure, and you could easily put words under them and make them a wonderful show tune if you wanted to.
The man the world would come to know as George Gershwin was born Jakob Gershwin in Brooklyn, New York on September 25, 1898. His parents, Morris and Rose, were Russian immigrants. They moved their family to a poor Jewish neighborhood on the Lower East Side of Manhattan when George was a young child. The family acquired an upright piano when George was 12. He taught himself to play it almost immediately. Although young George had some piano and theory lessons, his training was spotty. He said as an adult that he didn't even read music terribly well. Gershwin dropped out of school at age 15 and began making his living writing songs, some of which appeared in Broadway shows, and he promoted the music of others. His first song was published in 1916 when Gershwin was 18. The first Broadway show written entirely by Gershwin opened a few months before he turned 21. Gershwin eventually put 30 shows on Broadway, including the opera Porgy and Bess. He wrote music for several films and composed dozens and dozens of songs, often working with his lyricist brother, Ira. Despite his success, Gershwin's lack of training bothered him throughout his career.
We know from many stories that he meant to expand his horizon. There's the famous story of him approaching Maurice Ravel and asking him whether he could take lessons. And Ravel supposedly asked him, "Mr. Gershwin, how much money do you make?" And Gershwin told him, and then Ravel said, well, could I take lessons with you, please? Because he was so incredibly successful as a composer.
Although Gershwin saw his lack of training as a handicap, many see it as an essential element in his breezy improvisational style.
Well, I believe that the characteristic of Gershwin's music comes from his lack of background, classical background, because the spontaneity, the freshness, the way all the melodies and the tunes are so spontaneous, that comes direct from the heart.
I think he has completely successfully, for the first time in his life, merged and synthesized his truly American style with a structural discipline worthy of the great symphonists.
The music goes to the heart of the people, and that's a gift that a lot of trained musicians haven't found.
I've worked with Pascal Rogé before, and I find him one of the most tasteful pianists I know. And the quality that I look for in an interpreter of the Gershwin piano concerto is taste. Because I think it should not be played by a Herculean banger of the keys, you know. I don't think it should be played by somebody who only focuses on the jazzy elements. We know of Gershwin's love for Ravel. I think the color touch that it needs to be a little French. There needs to be a little impressionist color, a little shade of Debussy over the slow movement, for example.
Actually, not playing jazz is my greatest frustration in life, in a musician's life, because I can't play jazz. I love it, and I wish I could, but it's something you cannot learn. So I listen to it, and playing Gershwin for me is the nearest I can get to jazz playing, because I have the rhythm, I have the harmonies, and I have the great jazz music, but I don't have the improvisation, which I will leave for probably another life.
And now, from Eline Hall of Milwaukee's Marcus Center for the Performing Arts, pianist Pascal Rogé joins the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra and music director Andreas Delfs in the Piano Concerto in F by George Gershwin. George Gershwin's Concerto in F, performed by Pascal Rogé and the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, led by Andreas Delfs, the orchestra's music director. Pianist Pascal Rogé is a native of Paris. He is a highly acclaimed interpreter of the music of Ravel, Poulenc, Fauré, and other French composers. Mr. Rogé has performed in many of the world's major concert halls and has won 2 Grammy Awards for his recordings. George Gershwin wrote the Concerto in F in 1925, 1 year after he completed Rhapsody in Blue. He followed it with An American in Paris in 1928.
If you want to play any kind of music by Gershwin, you have to know him. You have to love his country, his music, the way he lives, where he lives, and you have to be in New York, you have to film, you have to see movies from that time, to be part of that culture, and then it comes absolutely naturally. You need to know about Gershwin before you play Gershwin.
The broadcast of this concert by the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra is a cooperative effort of the orchestra and Milwaukee Public Television. For information about the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, including upcoming classical and pops concerts, see the orchestra's website at www.milwaukeesymphony.org. Coming up next, for a good evening. And now, from the studios of Milwaukee Public Television of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. With me this evening are Megumi Kanda, the orchestra's principal trombone, bass clarinetist Bill Helmers, and violinist Jennifer Start. We're going to begin the whole conversation by having each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about and perhaps how you chose your instrument and, for that matter, this career. Megumi, would you like to lead off?
Sure. Let me see. Well, I'm Megumi, and I came from Tokyo, Japan. That's where I grew up. And I came to America when I graduated from high school in Japan. So, I was 18 when I came to this country. I went to the Cleveland Institute of Music. And how I got to choose a trombone, I guess I really wanted to play the clarinet. It's a very cool instrument. And I joined the band, but clarinet is a popular instrument.
Quite.
Yes. And so by the time I joined the band, all the told me to just go into the storage room and look for whatever's left over. And the only thing that was left over was the beaten up trombone. so there was really not much of a choice, but I started to play it and I really just loved the sound and how big it was and how shiny it was. And I just fell in love with it right away. And pretty much the first year I was playing the trombone, I knew I wanted to be a musician.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you had a job prior to the Milwaukee Symphony.
That's right.
Where were you?
I was in Rochester Philharmonic before this, and then I also played in the Albany Symphony.
All right. Bill, you want to launch into the introductions?
Well, sure. Like most of the wind players in the orchestra, I also got my start playing in the high school band. And originally I wanted to play saxophone, but I was told, well, you have to start out on the clarinet before you can move up to the saxophone. So I never really quite made that switch until fairly recently. Now I play a little bit of saxophone on the side. And I did my undergraduate studies at the Eastman School of Music, like Megumi, and also did some playing with the Rochester Philharmonic while I was there. And sometime during these years, I heard the Philadelphia Orchestra, and they have a wonderful bass clarinetist named Ronald Rubin. And I took some lessons with Ronald Rubin and began to take an interest in the bass clarinet. And that's been my position in the Milwaukee Symphony.
Now, we should clarify this. You auditioned as a bass clarinetist.
Well,
did you, or?
My position in the orchestra here is about 50-50. Half the time I play the regular soprano clarinet, and then when the bass clarinet is needed, I play that.
Perfect sense. Jennifer.
I started violin when I was 5 years old. I actually wanted to play the violin, so I got to play the instrument that I wanted. Just sort of a typical way that a young child would start playing the violin. My mom found out that the Suzuki class was starting at our local university in Valparaiso, Indiana, where I grew up. I thought that sounded like a lot of fun, and my two best friends were going to do it too, and so of course we all wanted to do it together. There was never any revelation that made me want to go into music. I just sort of always naively assumed that that would be what I did, and I got very lucky, and here I am. I went to, school. I went to high school at Interlochen Arts Academy, and a lot of people don't realize that they actually have a private high school as well as the music camp. And I went to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, the conservatory in Philadelphia. And I played in a couple of orchestras in Florida before I came here, and Buffalo Philharmonic, and wound up here, and I've been here now. This is my 15th season.
It's that long. And how long have you been here?
I'm about to complete my 25th year.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Congratulations.
The time passed quickly.
I hope there's a watch in it for you.
Maybe.
Megumi, how long have you been here?
This is my 3rd year.
Right.
It's accumulating.
Well, let's talk for a minute. We mentioned the bass clarinet just briefly. But technically, it bears the title utility instrument, and I don't think that's a title in the orchestra that people really understand what that means to play a utility instrument. You want to define it and maybe describe the instrument while we're...
Sure. Each woodwind section, the flutes, the oboes, the clarinets, and the bassoons have cousins of the same family. For the clarinets, we have a little piccolo clarinet, the E-flat clarinet, and then the bass clarinet, which sounds an octave lower than the regular clarinet. The bassoons, they have the contrabassoon, and the flute section also carries a piccolo player. And these auxiliary instruments, as they're called, really add a lot of color to the orchestral sound. I view my role as being something of a chameleon. Sometimes I'll play with the rest of the clarinet section. Sometimes I'll join the horn section and add a little different color to their high register. Often I support the cellos or the basses. So my role changes constantly, but usually it's used to add a little something extra to another section in the orchestra. And then every now and then it gets a solo. And I like to think that these are highly significant moments. Usually everything kind of stops and the bass clarinet plays something kind of mysterious.
I like that. You then have to keep, I've seen you play the soprano clarinet, as you put it, the B flat or A clarinet. I've seen you play saxophone with the orchestra. So you effectively have to keep a number of instruments sort of alive at one time. You have to remain proficient and comfortable and in shape.
There's a certain amount of practice and maintenance that goes into it, and there's a lot of equipment, actually. Reed players are constantly trying different mouthpieces and instruments, and the reeds themselves require quite a lot of attention. And of course, the more instruments you have, the more reeds you have to deal with.
Jennifer, you have the interesting title of second fiddle. You're a member of the second violin section, and that's a different set of demands than playing first fiddle, as it were.
Absolutely. It took me a long time to not feel the need to strive for that first violin section, because that's such a natural, it's just such a natural desire to want to play high when you play the violin. It's such a natural thing to play high, to play the melody. So it took me a long time to figure out that this is really an important role, and that a little bit of what you said, where you sort of play chameleon, you know, just what other instruments you support at a given time is constantly changing. And I think that what I realized is my favorite challenge is to try to make the second violin line beautiful, because it's awkward. It's not a, you know, it doesn't lay well on the instrument. It's not high and pretty and melodic, and oftentimes it's an accompaniment, or it's, you know, something awkward with awkward string crossings, or, and just to continually try to make that beautiful, I think it is a challenge, and it's something that is very rewarding to me. When we audition for the symphony, for any orchestra, usually you just audition for a spot, and you know, the orchestra makes the decision where to put you, where the opening happens to be. It's not a, you usually don't get the choice to audition for the first violin and second violin sections. And if you could only, I wouldn't say that that would be a reason to not audition for an orchestra, you know, because it's not the section I wanted. We're just, you know, happy to be given a job in the violin section.
One thing I was just noticing during the past week is certain conductors tend to work more with the inner voices than just the melody. And in a recent concert, I was really noticing how much the second violins actually were brought out of the texture and had solo moments. But sometimes that can depend on who's conducting.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. And it sort of enlightens just how much a conductor shapes a piece, you know, from conductor to conductor. The shape of a piece, the structure of a piece sounds quite different, or can. That's interesting. Megumi,
Yes.
you are a lone female at the back of the orchestra. And I'm guessing you've had that experience quite a bit as a female trombonist. What's it like sitting back there with all those guys?
Well, it's actually really fun. You know, I'm thinking back to my childhood. I always had more guy friends than girlfriends. Like, you know, we would, you know, go on the bicycle and go wheelie, or, you know, it's like, I was always hanging with boys anyway, that it's really kind of neat. And they take good care of me, and I love hanging with the, you know, the big boys back there.
Probably tempers things a little bit, having you back there.
Yes, yes, adds a little class.
Good thing. Much needed, I'm sure.
And you all have to go back to work after this. Oh, I'm kidding. We talked a little earlier, we were all talking about pieces that we really love, either love to hear or love to play, or for whatever reason dread playing. Let's kind of just go around and talk about pieces we love. Pick a piece you really love to hear, first of all.
You know, I love to hear Brahms. Like, I love hearing the violin sound. Like, you know, actually, I love the inner voice, and whatever is low. Like, I love second violin, viola, cello, bass clarinet. You know, anything low is, I love. So, like a warm harmony in, like, the Brahms, you know, I just love to hear that.
Well, for me, I am drawn to anything by Richard Strauss, probably because we just finished playing also Sprach Zarathustra. But Strauss really understood orchestration, I think, and especially my instrument. He really writes well for all of the clarinets, and you can hear so many things going on in his music. There's 100 people on the stage playing, and you can hear every voice. It's really magnificent the way he puts it together.
He was a master of that. When he finished Alpine Symphony, he wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, now that I've orchestrated the Alpine Symphony, I think I could successfully orchestrate a knife and spoon. Do you have a favorite piece?
Brahms. You can't go wrong with Brahms. And for, you know, for second violin, it's very wonderful to play, because he gave us a lot to do, a lot of interesting things to do. And I think, also can't go wrong with Beethoven. I think Beethoven, for me, makes me feel like a part of a larger instrument more than any other composer. Like, I can't say that playing the second violin part is so very exciting, but I do feel like I'm part of the bigger picture a lot with any Beethoven.
pieces you love to play? Just off the top of your head.
Any Mahler symphony is great. He just writes so much like great stuff for brass. And you know, Mahler is just so really deep and really emotional, and I think that's my favorite thing to play. And also Strauss too. That's a lot of fun. Richard Strauss. Yeah.
Bill?
I tend to enjoy whatever I'm playing at the moment. It's hard for me to pick out a favorite. I also enjoy the Mahler symphonies, Beethoven, Brahms. I'm always looking forward to whatever's coming up. I really enjoy the variety in the repertoire. I think it's interesting that the orchestral repertoire is so huge. There's a lot of important pieces I still haven't played after 25 years in the Milwaukee Symphony. And there's always something new. So I try to enjoy whatever I'm doing on a particular week.
That's excellent. Favorite?
Oh, yeah, Brahms definitely to play. Shostakovich, any of the symphonies. They're just so poignant. I would never get tired of that. I love the variety too. It's just so hard to pick out one or several. Another thing I really enjoy is when a piece seems like it's going to be kind of a clunker of a piece, and then, you know, if we have a great conductor that week that really makes music out of it, that's great. To be surprised like that is great.
Well, I believe we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you for joining us for this performance by the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra on Milwaukee Public Television. I'm Elaine Schmidt. Good night.